Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Welcome to the Erin Molan Show. It is so great to have your company. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you all had a wonderful weekend. We had a couple of great little bits go out, some bonus episodes. Make sure you check them out, including a very big special on the Chinese Communist Party and how that is all essentially growing, benefiting, profiting from the current chaos, not only in the Middle East, that's almost a tiny part of it, but in the West generally. It's a fascinating episode, so make sure you check it out. You can watch it on YouTube, listen to it on the podcast or on the Salem Network. We've got a couple of really big guests for you today, and then some really bizarre out there commentary, including Greta Thunberg and our favourite, wink, wink, Francesca Albanese, dancing. For what? There's a peace deal. Dance for the innocent Gazans being killed by Hamas. Honestly, the floggery here is insane. But we will talk about that very shortly. My two guests, we've got Corewy Walker, who works for Quillette, and he has actually, now the young kids call it brought receipts. I know that all the kind of cool, hip types always refer to receipts when they're talking about different topics. People like Candace Owens refers to receipts all the time, never really produces any of them, but that's okay. She still refers to them. So he actually listens to every podcast that these people do, all these woke right types. So he can actually tell us when the shift occurred, what it's down to, how they've evolved, rather than just coming out and saying, oh, we've got a problem. He knows how we got here, which then enables him to give us some solutions. But I feel like there's been a shift. I feel like we've gone so far now that way, and that's Bat Beep Crazyville, i.e. Tucker Carlson and his latest interview about the Jews. Of course, what else would he talk about? Oh my gosh, I can't believe I even felt the need to stipulate what Tucker Carlson was talking about. Yeah, Tucker Carlson did this show and he covered the Jews. Yeah, but he did this other interview and he also covered the Jews. Oh no, but did you see that episode where he covered the Jews? So yeah, obviously when I say Tucker Carlson, you know that he's covering the Jews. But it was so ridiculous, so hateful, so just crazy that I feel like even normal people who might not kind of be neither here nor there are going, okay, he's lost the plot. And so now they're kind of shifting back a little bit. Another couple of things have contributed, and I'm going to talk about that later, to what we see as maybe a bit of a reckoning moment, maybe a shift back to somewhat normality on the conservative side when it comes to, well, the online space anyway. We've also got the Israeli Foreign Minister who is on, Gideon Sa'ar, who talks about initially Ireland and this unbelievable decision to try and change the street names of a former president, also someone who contributed immensely to Ireland and to its people and to its culture and to its history. And he makes a reference that this is what they did before the Holocaust, right before the Holocaust. This is what the Nazi regime did. He calls the move so low, and it is. But what would you expect from Ireland? What would you expect? Some of the people there are amazing, but the government and those in power and this mob of just hate is so loud now that we need the silent majority. If it exists, maybe it doesn't in Ireland. I don't know. Prove me wrong. I would love to hear. I'd love to see people from Ireland coming out and saying, nah, not on my watch, not on my land. Use your voices. I would love to see that. Now let's get into a couple of headlines before I bring you my two guests, because this is a jam-packed show, which is what we love to give you every single day. The Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has officially submitted a request to be pardoned from his current corruption trials, which he himself describes as corrupt, the trials itself, and politically motivated. Now, we know how US President Donald Trump feels about the whole thing, because he's made that very clear.
Hey, I have an idea. Mr. President, why don't you give him a pardon? Give him a pardon. Come on. By the way, that was not in the speech, as you probably know. But I happen to like this gentleman right over here, and it just seems to make so much sense. You know, whether we like it or not, this has been one of the greatest wartime presidents. This has been one of the greatest wartime presidents. And cigars and champagne, who the hell cares about that?
Now, Bibi has released a video, it's in Hebrew, explaining why he chose this course of action, including that it would help lessen current issues with social cohesion domestically. Now, he's been in court with this trial since 2020. And keep in mind, as well as that, and as someone who's been through trials, not criminal, but civil, they are all-consuming. You don't live or function other than focusing on that. Everything else you do, it is such a stressful experience, regardless of what it is all-consuming. I don't know how someone continues not only to run a country, but to fight wars under that kind of pressure. And just the time it takes. Look at the facts yourself and determine whether you think he is erred or not. But my opinion would be the best thing for Israel right now, not the best thing for Bibi, the best thing for Israel is to have a prime minister, the one they elected in place, focused entirely on keeping them alive. Because, my friends, that is more than a full-time job. Now, he says that his focus, like I was just saying then, should be elsewhere. And he said it on this very show just last month. Have a listen. And would you accept a pardon if it were to be offered to you?
Well, look, I'll think about it, but I'm very grateful to President Trump for being so forthright. He just cuts to the chase. He tells it like it is. I mean, this trial is so absurd. You know, I spent 3 days a week, can you imagine this? Running a war and now seeking to expand the peace. I spent 3 days a week in a court talking about why my son Yair, who was on your show, but when he was 5 years old, received a Bugs Bunny doll. That's a terrible bribe. Or how I received some cigars from a friend. I mean, the whole thing is ridiculous. It's falling apart. The mainstream news media have stopped covering it because it's so, embarrassing to the prosecution. And President Trump basically called it a politicized and unjust witch hunt, which it is. It's not the last thing. But the important thing is I think it hurts both American and Israeli interests, which is also what he said. My time has to be free to pursue the things that will determine Israel's future and the future of peace in the Middle East. So the thing is, it's absurd, and these absurdities should end, and I appreciate the fact that he said it like it is. As far as my answer, yeah, I'll think about it.
Now, as for how the president of Israel feels about this, he has said his official response was he will consider the request responsibly and sincerely. Now, there's talk that he will only do this if Bibi kind of commits to walking away from politics, essentially, if there's something tied in that signals a clear ending to his political career. Well, we asked him outright on this show, again, just a couple of weeks ago, what his future holds and whether or not it was in Israel's best interest for him to continue. Now, you tell me if you think this is a man who is going to be willing to walk away from a job he was elected to, by the way. You tell me if you think he will accept some kind of deal that stipulates he's not allowed to run again. Have a listen. Do you plan to run for office again? And do you think it's in Israel's best interest for you to lead for another term?
The answer is yes. And the second answer is also yes, but the people who will determine that are the people. You know, I think I am the longest serving prime minister in Israel's history. And each time I have to get elected, people tell me, oh, you're King Bibi. I said, no, I'm not a king. How can I be a king? I have to be reelected. I have tremendous opposition, not very big, by the way, but funded with billions of dollars by foreign NGOs, by foreign governments and so on. I keep winning all the time. But I win because the people decide. There's a very good chance that will continue because they saw we've just had a great victory from an impossible situation where we were attacked, in the worst massacre on Jews since the Holocaust. And 2 years later, we've just dismantled the Iranian Axis. That whole clockwise move that we made to bring down our enemies or push them away from us has been very successful, and people are very, very happy with it. And of course, we released the hostages. Nobody believed that we would do it, but we did it. Nobody believed we'd get those last 20 hostages alive, and we did. And the people appreciate it. But I have many more tasks to accomplish. I want to expand the peace, the Abraham Accords, because there's now an opportunity because of our victories, because it's peace through strength, and Israel is very strong. I have I think that we could carry Israel to the next stage of AI and quantum, and make it, as it is, one of the 2-3 most advanced technological countries on earth. These are great tasks, and there are a few more. And if the people give me the mandate, I'll do it. But the people will decide, not the pundits, not the press, which usually is against me, and not the, how shall I say, not anyone else. Israel is an independent country, makes its own decisions, and I think on the whole it's made remarkably good decisions.
Yeah, my kind of thoughts on that would be a hell no, but let's watch with interest. I really like President Herzog. I've had a fair bit to do with him on my trips to Israel. I've seen him 3 or 4 times now, interviewed him a couple of times as well. I had conversations that were private, off camera. I think he's a really good guy. I think he cares deeply about his country. I don't know if he and Bibi are politically aligned, and most people would probably say they are not. But I think he is a good, decent person who cares deeply. So let's wait and watch and see what eventuates. Now, all of these pro-Palestinian protesters over the last, say, 48 hours over the weekend, causing absolute havoc around the world, including in New York City, in London, old mate Greta Thunberg in Genoa, doing the nutbush or whatever the hell you call this attempt at rhythm with Francesca Albanese. You know, Francesca, the United Nations repertoire for hating Jews. For Palestine. I always get that so confused, and you'd think now, 20 years into media and being on camera, being on air, that I would not screw that up so often, but every time I go to say it, I get so mixed up. Oh, it's crazy. Greta and Fran, have a look. I've got to show you properly.
Genocide in Palestine is still ongoing. I repeat, the genocide in Palestine is still ongoing.
Now, there are so many issues with this. I don't have the time nor the capacity to go through all of them, but I'd just love to remind the ladies that there is a peace deal in place. What genocide are you talking about? There was one genocide, the attempt on October 7 to wipe out an entire people. What's happened since ain't no genocide, unless, of course, you're referring to maybe what Hamas are doing to their own people, or maybe what's going on in many places of Africa. But if you're not referring to any of that, then you're deeply confused. What are they doing still trying to protest against Israel in the West? There is a peace deal in place. You should be out there angry about what's happening to innocent Gazans. But you're not blaming the people currently killing them, Hamas, or the people currently responsible for all of their suffering, Hamas. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this, as you know, most of you know watching, and any newbies who are here just to get content to troll me with, you should listen up too. You might learn something. This was never about innocence in Gaza. We all know that. And for those who feel like this is it's a them problem, not a you problem or a me problem. Oh, yeah, I'm not Israeli, I'm not Jewish, I don't live in the Middle East. I mean, yeah, I don't like it particularly, but it's not a me problem, guys. You can't afford to do that anymore. Look around. Remember in Melbourne, the Maya Christmas window, a tradition that people love to go to. It signals the start of Christmas. You take your kids. It's beautiful. They ruined that last year. You can't celebrate Christmas while kids are being killed in Gaza. It's not just about Israel and the Jews. It's about all of us and what we value. And by the way, we should be fighting for kids in Gaza. We should be fighting against the terrorists. We should be fighting against these idiots who provide cover for the terrorists who are killing kids in Gaza. But we should not be cancelling or stopping our way of life or doing the things that are special to us that keep social cohesion in our own countries, things that lift us up. Life is hard. Cost of living crisis, families, you're fighting, your partner's driving you insane, your kids are chaotic. There are certain things that make us feel better in our society, like Christmas time for most of us, we derive joy. They're trying to steal it. You're going Christmas shopping in London or in New York City in Zara, and they're trying to scream to cancel Zara. They're trying to get a donut shop shut down. Guys, a donut shop. What the hell has a donut ever done to them? Well, it's done a fair bit to some of them, I'll give you the nod. But donuts! Like, have a look.
Your donuts are coming!
So I say to you, if you love donuts, if you like Zara, or if you just like being able to walk through your city and look at Christmas lights, then this is your business now. It's all our business. These people are not fighting for anything noble. They are not fighting for innocent lives. They are fighting to destroy yours. And if you don't wake up, by the time you do, and you will, because it will be inevitable, it will be too late. Ireland, what a great segue here. Ireland. I mean, where do you start with Ireland? This latest attempt to erase Jews from that country is appalling. It is appalling. The foreign minister, I saw he was really fired up on X, so I sent him a message yesterday. This is Gideon Sa'ar, the Israeli foreign minister, and said, can you come on my show and talk to me about this? And he said, yes. So I want to bring you that conversation. We also spoke about the Muslim Brotherhood, the US move. Is it enough? Does it have legs, essentially? We also spoke about his future. Some rumours around he might be shifting to another portfolio. And we also spoke about what reaction he gets as someone who goes to a million other countries. Basically every month he's been to, I mean, I'm exaggerating clearly, a million other countries, but he's on the ground. How are they reacting to him? Is Israel actually hated everywhere? So it's a really, really important conversation. Enjoy. Foreign Minister, thank you so very much for joining me here on the Erin Molan Show. It's a real honour to have you.
Thank you, Erin. Thank you for having me.
I want to start, if we can, in Ireland. One of the first things you did when you took on this role was to shut down the Israeli embassy in Dublin. I'd say smart decision, given how horrific they have been, particularly since October 7. Can you tell me what they have done lately, their latest proposal, which should not only offend Israelis and the Jewish community globally, but their own people as well?
Last two things they had just done during the last week is one, calling with Spain to boycott Israel from participating in the Eurovision Song Contest, which is, by the way, in contradiction to what the European audience would like, because we were number one in terms of the popular vote in the last Eurovision Song Contest last year. But anyhow, to get cultural things involved because of political disputes is so low, but they had done lower than that. The City Council of the City of Dublin, which is the Irish capital, just decided to remove the name of Chaim Herzog, which was the president of the State of Israel, and his son is the president of the State of Israel now, and his father was the chief rabbi of Ireland, to remove his name from a street which is called on his name as a distinguished person, which remind us of Nazi regime deeds when they systematically removed Jewish names from streets just before the Holocaust. This is one of the first things that the Nazi regime did at the time, and change it to other names. I believe it's the lower point, but who knows what they will do tomorrow.
Talk to me about the Muslim Brotherhood decision coming out of America, if you can. A long time coming. It strikes me as utterly insane that we have Muslim nations who understand the evil that this organisation presents and have already done this. Western nations are left behind when it comes to this, but finally we're seeing movement. It's not as comprehensive or as quick as a lot of people would like, but is this a good start, or would you like to see America do more?
Well, first of all, it's an American decision, and I welcome this decision because I think it's right, it's appropriate. Muslim Brotherhood is a very dangerous ideological organization which push Muslim communities around the world, including in the Western Hemisphere, towards radicalism. And this is very dangerous. And in our region, it is working in order to topple the moderate Arab regimes like in Jordan or in Egypt. Lately, Jordan outlawed this organization. And I think it is very wise for Western countries to do that in order not to get their Muslim communities being radicalized.
I want to ask about where we're up to in Gaza with the peace deal. Almost daily, I'm seeing images coming through of Hamas slaughtering their own people, hurting their own people, torturing their own people. Of course, the mob who used to chant for those in Gaza have gone very silent when it comes to any of this. Is it realistic that we see something that holds, or do you think that we're on the brink of Israel having to do more? I know they're doing missions now and doing little things, but when do you make the call to actually go in and disarm Hamas militarily, because they don't look like they're doing much of it themselves?
Well, first of all, we are committed to do whatever we can do in order that the Trump's plan will be successful. It's not that we don't have doubts, but I think that if we can try to achieve the objectives that we define in a diplomatic way, it is okay. It's better than to do it in a military way, and we will give it a chance. We will give it a fair chance. It is true that Hamas is now strengthening its hold over the population in its part of Gaza Strip, because today Gaza Strip is like split 50-50 between the places we are staying and the places that Hamas still controls. And eventually there should be established this ISF, the International Stabilization Force, that the US is working in order to establish. And they will probably have to deal with this very difficult task of disarming Hamas and demilitarization of Gaza Strip as a whole, in order that it won't be a threat anymore to the state of Israel. And let's see what will happen with that. This ISF was also included in the Security Council resolution that passed only 2 weeks ago. For the time being, we have, in Middle Eastern terms, a ceasefire. They are breaching the ceasefire from time to time. We are responding, and sometimes we need to act against time-critical threats. But with regard to the heart of the plan is to disarm Hamas. And that probably won't happen before the ISF will be on the ground there. And I don't assume it will happen before January.
Elon Musk recently introduced something on X that would require accounts to show where they are from, and that has exposed a lot of fraudulent accounts in that space. A lot of accounts that were pretending to be, say, based in America and then amplifying this hate against Israel. So everyday Americans might look at this and think, oh, wow, this is what most people in my country think. They must be onto something. Well, they've been exposed now. We get told all the time the entire world hates Israel. Yes, there's a chunk that does, but you are actually visiting different countries. You are hosting leaders from other nations. You are interacting firsthand. Tell me, does the world actually hate Israel, or is this just part of this evil and this ideology that wants us to think they do? What are leaders telling you? From I've got a list here recently in the last month: Hungary, Romania, Estonia, Latvia, India, Paraguay, Argentina. These are your visits in the last month or so. What feedback are you getting? Are you hated everywhere you go?
No. First of all, we shouldn't deny there is a huge wave, very well financed, of anti-Israeli and anti-Semitic approach, mainly in the Western Hemisphere. We see it, and it is fueled by money. What Elon Musk did is very important in demonstrating that some of the so-called Palestinian voices are not Palestinians at all, and they were heard from totally distant countries. But maybe the next step should be, in order that we really understand the things, to discover or to expose how much it is financed and not very authentic in large part of it. It's not that we are isolated. It's not that we don't have friends. We do have friends, and we are strengthening our connections. But we are facing a huge anti-Semitic wave. I would say that for 80 years after the Holocaust, anti-Semitism was not so in fashion. People were more shy, more hiding their anti-Semitism. But now it's fashionable again. And you can see that. I'm sure you can see it in Australia as well. We have great friends in Australia, but we do face some anti-Semitic phenomenon, and sometimes it is connected to also anti-Western approaches as a whole. So we have a lot of work to do, and this is what I'm doing. I just hosted the Foreign Minister of Denmark, who was here today, just to demonstrate that we have visits all the time of high-level visits in Israel, and people want to interact. Some of them, or a lot of them, expose that they know we are right more than they can express because of pressure coming from public opinion, mainly from larger Muslim communities in their countries.
Last question, Minister. I know your time is very valuable. I was looking at a few different things in local Israeli media, and there was a little bit of speculation that you might be going into another portfolio, potentially into head of defense. Is there any truth to any of that? And how long do you think we'll see you in the current role? And do you have further aspirations anywhere else?
I'm good in my ministry. I have a lot of work to do here. It's a huge battle, public opinion battle. All over the world, it's one of the greatest battles. We should be excellent, and that's what I'm trying to do. Diplomatic battle, public diplomacy battle, they are very important, so I'm totally concentrated on that, and it includes not to read all the newspapers all the time.
Unfortunately, my job includes reading all the newspapers all the time. Quick thing. Are you winning that battle, do you think, the diplomatic battle?
Well, the diplomatic battle is not necessarily equivalent to the public diplomacy battle.
Agreed.
In the public diplomacy battle, we are still in inferiority, and we must acknowledge that. In the diplomatic battle, we were able to stop very dangerous movements, including sanctions in the EU and all this stuff. And we were able to conduct a very complicated war during 2 years, and with all the difficulties, maintaining our international positions. Not only that, as you hinted, we widened. We have today more embassies. I just opened a new embassy in Tallinn, in Estonia. I did it this year also in Moldova and Zambia, and I intend to do more in the next year. So we must see both challenges, the diplomatic challenge, but also the public diplomacy challenge. And probably this is one of the reasons I'm giving this interview.
Well, we appreciate that very much, Foreign Minister. Thank you so much for your time.
All the best. Thank you.
Interesting, huh? I mean, he was fairly effusive in shutting that down, but I suspect maybe not a kind of shift that way, but maybe in the future a shift that way for Gideon Sa'ar. I mean, he's never told me, but I would assume he would have ambitions beyond his current role. I think he would be an incredible leader of Israel one day. I've gotten to know him fairly well since October 7, and yeah, I really like him. I think he would do a phenomenal job, so let's watch with interest what eventuates there. My next guest is Corewy Walker, who not only follows all that is going on with this woke right kind of move into hate by the likes of Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, and all the others, but he actually brings receipts, as the cool kids say. He listens to everything, and he has for years and years, so he knows exactly when the shift occurred. He knows what kind of was happening around that time, where all of a sudden we get Tucker condemning Qatar to suddenly basically loving them passionately and promoting them every second day, and hating Israel and hating the Jews, despite his really weak denials on the fact. It's a really interesting conversation. I've noticed over the past little while, the past couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, this shift, and it feels like there's been almost a recalibration from this insanity, and everyday people kind of jumping on board a little bit, maybe not necessarily endorsing it, but condoning it, which can be just as dangerous. But I feel like, particularly in the last week, Tucker Carlson, with his latest guests and his attempts to rewrite history, and you know, his Hitler and the Holocaust and the whole thing, I think he's gone so far that even people who might have been tempted have gone, nah, that's too far for me. And they're slowly kind of moving back. So I don't feel like any of the people have, like your Tuckers or your Candaces, clearly. But I feel like there's been this shift away from people who might have been entertaining it slightly, because thank goodness they've gone so far that people were going, oh, okay, I was kind of tempted a little bit, but that's too much for me. We've also had this revelation of where so many accounts are from, and this exposing, thanks to Elon Musk and X and others who have done so much good work in this space, of where so many of these accounts are from that pretend to be, say, American and represent what Americans think and feel on the ground, end up being in the Middle East or in Europe or in India or Qatar. So all of a sudden people are waking up and going, oh, wait a minute, I thought that general sentiment was this, but it's actually not. These are bots who are amplifying voices that aren't real, so that everyday Americans think, oh, wait a minute, this is how others feel now. Maybe I should entertain this. This is how I feel. But that's all been exposed now. So I think that's a really big part of it as well. These big accounts that were influencing domestic politics on the ground in America have now been exposed as being completely fraudulent, which means people following them and getting on board with suddenly going, oh, wait a minute, I've been misled. My neighbour down the road doesn't actually think that the Holocaust wasn't a big deal and that Hitler might have been a good bloke. So this is all kind of working its way in towards actually now starting to maybe even out a little bit and go back to a place that is more palatable to most, not insane would be another way of putting it. But Corey explains how we ended up getting here, how these influencers ended up having such a big say and a big apparent network, not all of which is real, as we find out. But it's a really fascinating conversation. Corey, first of all, thank you so much for spending time with us here on the Erin Molan Show. Big fan of your work. You do a wonderful job.
Thank you so much.
Tell me what it is that got you so riled up about this sudden group of independent, and for those listening to the podcast, I'm using inverted commas there because they ain't anything like independent, but this group that is just cozying up, as you call it, to anti-Semitism.
Well, I think that generally speaking, I've listened to their content for quite a while. I probably started like around the pandemic. And so I kind of saw the shift of someone, for example, Megyn Kelly going from Fox News to the internet, and also Tucker Carlson doing the same. And so there's been like a massive shift in general, just of like a migration of talent from traditional live television to alternative media, you would call it, which is like podcasts or YouTube channels. And so I found it fascinating because in the beginning there was this like a lot of optimism that, the kind of gatekeepers are gone. So now they'll be able to be unfiltered and talk about stories that maybe have been buried because they were inconvenient to people who had power or wealth or whatever. So you get more authentic, real reporting. And I think what kind of has been frustrating is that the incentive structure, I feel like, on the internet is not necessarily to tell the quote-unquote truth, as we would say. A lot of times it's to just spread conspiracy theories, lies. It's kind of like National Enquirer, or if you guys have an equivalent in Australia, just like a tabloid. Because I feel like the average person, I don't think really, it's maybe suppressing, but, maybe the average person doesn't really care about truth or doesn't care about actual rigorous reporting. They just want kind of like intellectual junk food, I would call it, or brain junk food, where you're kind of just feeding them nonsense, but it's entertainment, which is why a lot of
and it's disguised as legitimate, Corey, and that's the danger with it, isn't it? Because you talk about this junk food for the brain, but it's almost like they're gaslighting people into thinking that this is intellectual content.
Yeah, and you saw it obviously with anti-Semitism, which is kind of the newest iteration, but you also may have saw some of that with COVID or other things of that sort, where people would kind of just spread whatever nonsense, and it happens on both sides, the left and the right, or the left does like Russia collusion or things like that when it comes to President Trump. So it's kind of on both sides. I don't want it to make it seem like it's just a conservative thing, but I think both sides, kind of, they understand who their audience is, and so they feed them content that is ridiculous and outlandish, but confirms a certain bias that they already had. And I think that's bad, because if so-called alternative media is going to replace traditional news and linear television is dying out, what we're going to be left with is just conspiracy theories, essentially.
It's such a great point you make, and I look at a lot of them, and you're right. It was almost like now I'm independent, I'm unshackled. I'm not being told what to do. I don't serve the same lord, the same boss, the same whatever it is anymore. I can tell the truth unapologetically, unashamedly. But all of a sudden, they found a new master, and this new master was algorithm, clicks, and of course that means money.
Yeah, and audience capture, right? Because if you're working for CNN, I don't know if Jeff Zucker still runs things over there, but like you may be working for Jeff Zucker, you may be working for who's running Fox nowadays, and they may have a certain preference of how they want certain news to be presented, or certain stories to be featured, or certain stories to not be platformed. When you go to alternative media, of course, you don't have to deal with those gatekeepers, but then you're captive of the audience, because the audience is the one who decides if they want to just subscribe or not. If they don't like the fact that you're covering a certain story or not covering a certain story, or if you're framing it a certain way, then they can choose to take their money, their subscriptions back, and then go to another content creator that's giving them content that they prefer. So, both sides get captured by the audience. You can say it's not just a right-wing thing, but I think with the anti-Semitism issue, I think that you're seeing it start to become more and more entrenched on the right. It's always been on the left, but it's becoming more and more of a feature on the right, which I think is why it's interesting to write about, because we're seeing it develop in real time.
You're probably one of the few people that's been heavily engaged in this content prior, and you started watching a lot of it during COVID. Explain to me the shift that you've seen in the likes of the Megyn Kellys, the Tucker Carlsons, and whoever else you like, and how sharp has this shift into this new space been?
So I think that if you were to watch, Fox News or CNN, I mean, it was, yes, there was a bias, and yes, they would say some crazy things now and then, but it was still like within a certain boundary. And I think they were, still like actual doing real reporting, actual really discussing the news, the facts, how they saw it, doing real interviews that were respectful, and trying to actually get to some semblance of a truth or reveal something for their audience. I think what's interesting with Tucker is, in particular, is that when he was fired from Fox News, probably over the Dominion scandal, and then he went to do his podcast. When he started the podcast, it was pretty reasonable. It was a conservative podcast, not really that distinguishable probably from other podcasts in that lane. And if you actually look at some of the stuff he was saying maybe in 2022 or 2023, where he would talk about, let's say Israel, because that's why I always write about is Israel. He would talk about Israel and say, well, we give Israel funding, and we give them funding, but it's debatable whether or not they need it. They can probably, defend themselves. They can handle themselves. And there's a good chance that, our giving funding or military aid to Israel puts unnecessary shackles on Israel that prevent them from achieving their military goal, which is actually a pretty mainstream opinion. Even within Israel, a lot of people are having that debate. So whether or not we take or not take American aid is a legitimate debate.
Laura Loomer has been very vocal on that, hasn't
she? She talked about, I think like maybe a few days ago, she openly said that America stopped giving aid to Israel. But what's interesting is now in 2025, when he talks about Israel, he says that America is literally subsidizing Israel. Israel would not exist if it weren't for America giving them aid. They don't have a real economy. Their economy is all propped up by the United States. Their healthcare system, their universities, all funded by America. And that is a lie, obviously, because we give Israel roughly, $3.8 billion a year. That money is then used to literally given back to us because they buy American missiles and weapons and stuff with that money. And also they have a $500 billion economy within Israel, GDP, which, they use to fund their own, university system, healthcare. Like, we're not subsidizing that, but that's what he's telling his audience. And that's just a lie. And I think that there's been a shift towards this willingness to tell outright lies because, that's what the audience wants to hear. And I think that he's trying to attract...
And if someone hits back on that with facts, it's, we're not allowed to criticize Israel. You're trying to silence me. It's the same
he does. He does that. And he also, I think I notice now what he does is that when he talks to his audience, he kind of sets them up to go with it as a pre-calculated set of talking points where he kind of wants them to criticize Israel or he wants them to kind of go against Israel. And if they don't, or if they say, well, the issue isn't Israel, it's some other country. It's actually Qatar, right? Which probably is Qatar. But then what he'll do
it is Qatar.
Yeah, but then what he'll do is like he'll immediately interrupt them and say, "Oh, okay," and then he'll pivot to another subject and try to get off of it because he doesn't. What's interesting with his show is, like I said, like it's kind of like always criticizing Israel and Jews in the Middle East, but not necessarily willing to criticize radical Islam. In some cases, making excuses for it, saying that Hamas isn't a terrorist organization. Like he doesn't believe that they're
insanity. And then he's the first to say, "Why does everyone talk about Israel all the time? Why does everyone talk about Israel?" And then when he finally covers the Christian genocide in Nigeria, which he did last week, and I did a search week prior and did a piece saying he's never once mentioned Nigeria. He doesn't. The focus is entirely on, oh no, it doesn't actually exist. He can't for a second actually say Islamic extremism and all the other forces at play there are evil in doing this.
Right. And then I think then it starts to raise questions about, okay, if you're like, okay, I care about Christians not being oppressed or murdered anywhere in the world, fine, that's a legitimate concern to have. And you're saying Israel is doing this to Christians, which is a lie. That's not happening. But even if you were to believe that, fine, you have every right to talk about that on your platform. If Israel were doing that, that would be worthy of a discussion.
Absolutely.
But to single-handedly point out Israel without bringing up the fact that in the entire Islamic world, Christians are routinely persecuted, murdered, exterminated, by Islamist forces and terrorist groups, and that's happening as we speak in Nigeria, and actually denying that's happening in Nigeria. And the Nigerian Christians themselves are coming out and releasing videos saying that we are being persecuted and murdered because of our faith. You have Christian organizations in the United States who have to literally like raise money to pay for the release of Christian hostages in Nigeria by these terrorist groups. So they literally have to give terrorist groups money so Christians are not being murdered. And that actually, ironically, is funding the terrorist groups, right? So like that incentivizes more hostage taking. But if they don't do it, the Christians die. So it's like they're in an impossible situation. That is a really interesting story that needs to be, covered. And someone with his platform could be spreading that and hopefully inspire some congressional action in the United States. But instead, he decides to act as if it's not happening, and then that causes people like me to believe, okay, you don't really care about Christians, so there probably is some other incentive here or some other motive, and what's the motive, and what's always the common denominator here? I don't like to pull the anti-Semitism card. I'm not even Jewish, but
and I don't either. I feel like that weakens for some reason that and it's awful, but for some reason it just doesn't hit like it used to, and people just go, "Oh, you're hard." It's not.
Yeah, because. And I'm very obviously, my bias is I'm very much in favor of Israel. But, even an immediate aftermath of October 7th, there was, in my view, a mistaken thing where a lot of pro-Israel advocates did, where if there were any criticisms of the war in Gaza or, even just criticizing Netanyahu or anything, you were immediately called an anti-Semite. If you wanted a ceasefire in Gaza, you were called an anti-Semite, right?
Which is wrong.
And that was wrong because that is a legitimate opinion to have about just a disagreement on a military conflict. Like, you're allowed to have that. That doesn't make you an anti-Semite. But that was repeated so much by even well-meaning people, maybe like a Jonathan Greenblatt at ADL, and when that was parroted so much and everyone got called anti-Semite, it just stopped mattering. And that led to the rise of people like, for example, Nick Fuentes, in my view, because when being called an anti-Semite and a white supremacist doesn't hit like it used to, you can't really use that to take someone down. So
that's exactly right. People don't fear being called that because it's lost kind of the potency that it once had.
And I would add that for some people it's become a badge of honor, which is actually kind of dangerous. And I've seen that on the left, the radical left and the radical right, where they actually like being called an anti-Semite because it means that they are, in their view, doing the right thing, which is, attacking Israel hard enough to get that label, which is seen as, like they're proud of it, which is sad. But that's where we are. But I do think that audience capture, you see it with Tucker, which is a very obvious one. But I also think you're seeing it with Megyn Kelly, which I think is a more fascinating case.
Podcast rankings, and I look at this stuff 5-6 times
Where is she?
a day. She's she's number one. In the last month or two, she has been, and this is in news commentary, she used to kind of be in there and around the top 10, and she was always, a big deal and a big name and very good at what she does. But in this last period, 2 months, say, she has gone to, and it aligns with this shift that we've suddenly seen.
Is she, by what rankings? Is that Spotify or is it?
I look at like 3 or 4 different ones. There's one called Orsha. There's one called Podcast Rankings. So it's live podcast rankings on a heap of different. So I think it combines all of them.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. I usually use Spotify, and when I wrote the piece,
Spotify,
she was like,
I don't look at specifically at all. What is she on Spotify?
when I wrote the piece that was featured in Quillette, she was ranked around somewhere in the 30s.
Wow.
And
okay.
yeah, and Tucker was ranked like number 5, I think, in the country. He's kind of gone up to number 2, and then Candace Owens was ranked at number 11. And I actually kind of pointed out what's interesting was that she wouldn't criticize Candace Owens or Tucker for their just blatant anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
And my hypothesis was that she knew that she has a lot of audience overlap with those two, and she wants access to Tucker because Tucker's more popular.
So this is an overall podcast ranking.
Oh, okay.
She has been number 1, so it combines all the podcast kind of channels, Spotify, Apple.
Okay.
And she's been at number 1 consistently just the more that she seems to cop heat for this kind of what I call and labeled very publicly the hypocrisy of saying I don't have enemies on the right and my focus is on the left. I think you should focus on anyone who threatens the values that matter and what you believe in. But it's really interesting.
I'm grateful to see Ben at least at number 4 so that people are getting some sort of a balanced opinion.
Right, that takes away from my theory because it's kind of Meghan, it's Tucker. Ben is generally always up there. Candace is up there, but not as high as in recent times.
I would say that Ben kind of has started in that game way earlier because remember Ben in the early 2000s, he never had he was never a Fox News host or anything. Like he started on the internet. He's kind of the pioneer of this sort of alternative media landscape, right, on the right. And he's kind of the North Star or kind of the person that everyone else was looking up to because like he was like Charlie Kirk for Charlie Kirk. He was the person going and doing these college campus tours, debates, all of that. And he built a podcast following. He literally co-founded, I think, Daily Wire.
He did,
and he helped build it. So like he's kind of the pioneer. So he kind of already has this built-in lead. So it's kind of interesting that people like Tucker Carlson and Megyn Kelly have been able to kind of leapfrog him, even though he had a massive head start over them. So I think that should be taken into account too. When you build an audience over decades, it's you're going to probably keep a lot of those people there.
But see, they're feeding each other a lot as well, aren't they? Because Ben Shapiro's going on Megyn Kelly's show and calling
cross
out
promotion
things, and absolutely. And then so he's kind of, even though they oppose on many things, they kind of everyone feeds off each other.
I kind of do wonder if some of this is there's kind of like a soap opera effect or reality TV effect where people are like, okay, I can't believe Ben said this about Tucker, so I'm going to listen to Tucker's show, see the response, and then you want to go see Ben. Yeah,
the same people doing it, and it's all you're exactly, and they all benefit. They all benefit from it. But it's interesting because I feel like, and I'd love your thoughts on this. I feel like with any of this kind of stuff, and we've seen different versions of this kind of thing, I think, throughout history in regards to extremism and whatever else. Is there a stage where people actually just get sick of it and they crave, and it sounds like such a wanky word, but authenticity, truth, without the BS? They actually say, okay, I've had enough of the reality TV, the Big Brother or whatever it is. I actually now want things that I know are genuine, authentic, truthful, and I'm sick of the conspiracy. Do we, or does it just continue to a point where we explode?
Well, what is truth, though? I mean, I think that's a more philosophical question.
Truth is truth. There is no my truth. There is no your truth. Truth is truth.
But I think people, I think that's a good question because I think people have different interpretations of like what is true. I mean, in America, we still have at least 25% of our country who literally believe that the election was stolen from Donald Trump in 2020. And, all the right-wing podcast hosts have had to pivot and kind of accept that. And I don't believe that's true. I don't think the election is stolen. But I know that as someone who's kind of oriented on the center-right in my kind of media kind of configuration, that's where I am. But I'm taking a huge risk by saying that, right? Because if a lot of my audience probably does believe the election was stolen, right? So I may lose people by saying that. So to answer your question, I would say like I wish I had a good, clear answer to that. I don't know because I think that this is a natural outgrowth to me of like reality television, which people love the drama. It's in America we have like the Jerry Springer show. Like it's a natural outgrowth of tabloids, right? Like I feel like this is kind of the podcast sphere has kind of become like tabloids. I think people at our core, a lot of people are not that intellectually rigorous. I hate to call people stupid, but we kind of are. I think a lot of us do like just this sort of like lowbrow kind of lazy entertainment because even though I listen to Megyn Kelly and I still listen to her, I do that as a form of kind of like entertainment, not necessarily because I even care about the news, but because I find Megyn herself entertaining. So part of this is entertainment. And I think the same thing is true for Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, even Ben Shapiro, and also the kind of the bro podcasters like Joe Rogan or Theo Von, where it's like a lot of this is just entertainment at the end of the day. It's an extension of
And
entertainment.
it's okay because like you can identify it as so. And I agree with you entirely. And our job really, more than any, is to entertain. That's regardless of what the basis of that is. But I think the issue is when people are consuming it and don't identify it as so, if they believe that this is factual without any bias or narrative, that's where it becomes dangerous, right?
But even if you look at the mainstream, like Fox News or CNN, MSNBC, a lot of their main hosts have always been just like pundits. So like it wasn't necessarily people giving you like the straight news. Like for example, Fox News has like a Brett Baier who like is actually like a real journalist who they send him to do like the real interviews when they really want to interview President Trump, when they really want to talk about something that's really serious in the world. Like they'll have him because he's like a legitimate or like a presidential debate.
They identify him as so. The others are commentary. Opinion.
But then they also have like a Jesse Waters. They have a Greg Gutfeld. These are people who are just kind of like, oh, I'm just gonna. I want to turn my brain off and listen to something entertaining.
But
so
I feel
everyone
like it's
has
not
a role
disguised.
to play.
I feel like that's very obvious. And like when I was on Sky News Australia, we had news up until 5 o'clock, and then prior to the start of the evening programming. And you're right, actually, maybe it's not the same on Fox. I watch a lot of Fox, and I actually don't. You're right. We used to have this 30-second big opinion, commentary, because of, they were so paranoid, making sure people understood that from
Knew
5
the
PM.
difference. Yeah.
Yeah, Sky News Australia prior to 5 p.m. was straight news. No commentary, no opinion. It was straight news presenters.
Yeah.
From 5 p.m. onwards, it had opinion in a big red kind of block at the bottom of my show and everyone else's show that was opinion. And I think I look back on that and didn't think it was a really big deal, but now I value and appreciate
It was useful.
It is, just so people understand. And you're right, actually, Fox they blur that, do they, a little bit?
Well, in America, so if your audience is mostly Australian, you may not know. I think the Murdochs are Australian, aren't they?
No, my audience is now majority American. But when I was on Sky News Australia, it wasn't at all. So I'm with the Salem Network now, so very much.
Oh, okay.
American.
Great.
Thanks for noticing.
But like I would say that in America, Fox News actually had to when they defend themselves in court, they actually will say like we're an entertainment channel. Like that's kind of like how legally they're able to kind of elude any sort of lawsuits. Now that didn't work when it came to Dominion and when they were spreading the kind of the election denialism stuff and they were sued over that. And that also ultimately led to the downfall probably of Tucker Carlson, right? Because they had to pay like $700 million over that. So it became a thing where like there's a huge blur, I think, in America between what's actual news content and what's actual entertainment. But I think Fox understands the value of putting on a show. That's just what they do. Like if you look at their graphics and the way they present things, it's just so high quality, even more so than their peers. And so it's all entertainment at the end of the day. And I think they understand the importance of doing the entertainment aspect. And they've revolutionized cable news by doing that. And I think that
they've had to, Corey, because we can get news now on X. We can get news as it breaks online. The second it breaks, we've got our news. We don't need Fox for news anymore. We get home and what we want is their spin. We want value add. We want something deeper.
Right. But I would say even if you look before the advent of social media, look at, for example, Bill O'Reilly, right? And Sean Hannity, who also predates that era, they were also opinion-driven hosts. If you look at, for example, how conservatives revolutionized talk radio, right? Rush Limbaugh. Right? And Ben Shapiro literally is like the successor to Rush Limbaugh, basically. He does the same thing, but for like millennials and Gen Z. So it's this has kind of always been the case, but I do think that social media has kind of changed it because of the predatory algorithms, which kind of give you that feedback and you're able to adjust in real time to understand what your audience likes. And if you know your audience likes anti-Semitism, then you can really lean into that content and give them even more. And the issue with this is that you can only do the same trick so many times. So you have to get more and more outlandish. You have to get more and more crazy. You have to keep, and you have the competition because you don't have gatekeepers. So anyone can launch a podcast, right? So instead of having 3 or 4 competitors in your time slot or whatever, you have 50 or 100, right? So like you're constantly out competing the next person to see who can get the most eyeballs. So you have to be more and more outlandish. It creates a very bad incentive structure. And I think that's where we see the anti-Semitism and is coming from. It's the audience capture, and also the algorithmic growth, and also just the fact that literally anyone can do this now. So like the incentive is to be as outlandish and crazy as possible to get eyeballs.
Tell me what is the solution to this? And or is one even required? Is this as big a deal as people like you and me who spend a lot of time online in this space looking at this content, particularly if your algorithm is all of this stuff, it's all I see. So I think, oh my God, this is an existential threat to the conservative movement in America, blah, 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 blah. Or is it just, it's entertainment. We're all really caught up in it, but Mr. and Mrs. Shirley who live in, in whatever, Texas, couldn't give a tinker's cuss and aren't impacted by it. What's your thoughts?
I wish I had a clear answer. I think it's hard. I think part of the problem is like we've accepted cultural norms that probably make it harder to solve the issue because on the right, we are against cancel culture now. We kind of for years were like, oh, you can't cancel people. They kind of say whatever they want. And we're kind of opposed to that. Like we're opposed to holding people accountable. That's cancel culture, right?
Yeah. But they weaponize that as well and say, oh, you're criticizing me. I thought we're against cancel culture on our side. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's not cancel culture. Like it's to criticize someone or to switch off yourself is not cancel culture.
But I would even say that criticizing someone for being bigoted or anti-Semitic or racist or misogynistic or whatever, I think coded as ideologically on the left. So a lot of people don't want to do that. They don't want to call someone anti-Semite because it seems kind of like a liberal thing to do. So
because it was so badly weaponized, wasn't it? If someone said Islamic extremism is bad, you're Islamophobic, you're a racist, you're a bigot. So we're almost gun shy about using it when it's legitimate and when it's deserved.
Right. So like there's an incentive to kind of play down. So like, for example, one of my favorite commentators is actually British. His name is Connor Tomlinson. And so like I actually watched a video that he did with someone who's a buddy of mine. And they were talking about the Nick Fuentes Tucker Carlson interview and the scandal that's kind of broken out because of that. And what he was trying to say, like, you guys can't, first off, you can't cancel Tucker or Nick Fuentes because they're both really popular now. But on top of that, they were just telling jokes. Like what Nick is doing is just telling jokes. So I'm like, Connor, I think is way smarter, too smart to know that these are just jokes. But I feel like he's just saying that because he doesn't want to attack people for being anti-Semitic because it's seen as a liberal thing. But I think even in that video he admitted, and I don't think he realized he admitted, but he knows, he said that if you call Nick Fuentes an anti-Semite and a racist and a white supremacist, you're attacking him from the left flank. So they don't want to actually call anyone out for these things because it's perceived as being like a liberal thing. And I also think that they are trying to attract this kind of like young male demographic because a lot of young men, at least in America, have shifted to the right. I think this is a global phenomenon. But I think part of that is the fact that young boys just like, I think this is kind of universal. Young boys like to say things that are transgressive and edgy and could be offensive and offensive jokes and things like that's just the thing young boys do. And I think that Nick Fuentes is probably the one person in the country that just says these things that are you're not supposed to say. And a lot of people kind of react to it as like, they see it as like almost like a tempting thing to do. The taboo of it is
the young men thing is a whole other conversation, isn't it? How we've shamed
it's a whole different thing.
Masculinity. So we've put them in a corner where they're actually looking for someone and it pushes them to the extremes. Yeah,
because it's similar to the I forget his name, but the big kind of like he was like an MMA fighter that's like a Muslim guy, but he was extremely popular and he's a really terrible person. But I think part of it is that young men were attracted to someone who didn't. Yeah, Andrew Tate. That's what I'm thinking of. Sorry. Thank you for
you're right.
bringing that. But like, I think it's kind of similar in the fact that people are attracted to someone that's unfiltered, unvarnished, and is unashamed to be male and isn't trying to talk down to young boys and isn't trying to steer them away from their natural impulses.
Correct.
And I think that is part of this. And I think that on the right, they're trying to more and more embody that young male culture. And so they don't want to call out these things like anti-Semitism and racism because it's perceived as something that conservative, masculine men just like don't do. And so I think that that's kind of allowing this to fester. But I also think that if we're talking about just the digital economy, I do have a podcast actually. I don't really have a huge audience, but if my audience were
tell us.
Oh yeah, I mean, so I launched a podcast recently. It's called The Imperialists, and so like it's kind of like a pro-Western civilization podcast. So we talk a lot about Israel, but we also talk about other countries, Ukraine, and just like domestic issues and kind of like the anti-American, anti-Western sentiment that is being spread
Check
largely
it
by
out,
the left.
guys. Congratulations.
Yeah, but for me personally, like if I had a podcast that was in like, let's say the top 30 or 40 or 50, and I wanted to rise up the rankings, I'm not sure if I would pick a war with someone like a Tucker Carlson, because I know that you have the audience overlap. And so, and also the incentive, like I said, if you know what your audience wants, it becomes a very toxic feedback loop because you're constantly trying to feed them more and more of the content that they want. You see this on the left too. I think October 7th in many ways was kind of like, in America, to me, kind of like September 11th, in the sense that in September 11th, you had the rise of a lot of conservative talk media, right? Like that September 11th really gave a lot of people September 11th gave a lot of people a career in the media, right? Talking about radical jihadist extremism. A lot of people that we see today got their start back then. And I think October 7th is similar in that a lot of people, for example, who was talking about like Dave Smith prior to before that, like that wasn't a thing, or Jake Shields or any of these people. They were just like crazy nobodies on the internet, and they were able to find an issue that they could harp on, and they found an audience. And so I think there's that. And I also think, but I also want to also mention the rise of TikTok, and the algorithms are not run by America or any Western country, but by China. And since those algorithms are also populated by the youth, and I think there's a crazy stat that like about 70% of people under the age of like maybe 25 or something have a TikTok account, and they spend like 2 hours a day on TikTok on average. It's wildly popular. And so they're on TikTok, they're seeing this anti-American, anti-Israel content just like flooded, like streaming to them nonstop. And then they, that's where their kind of mindset is. And so I think that the incentive is for the alternative media host to kind of like tap into that. It's harder to try to change someone's mind than to just affirm whatever their viewpoint is. And I think that that's kind of where you are. And the last thing I want to touch on is, you want to say, like, is this actually affecting the real world? I think the answer to that is yes. And the reason why is because if you watch the kind of viral clips of these college tours that they're doing after Charlie Kirk was murdered, a lot of these hosts are being confronted with very specific, sharp questions about Israel. But the funny thing about that is that the talking points are almost like, it literally mirrors what's being said on these podcasts, where they talk about the Israel bombed the USS Liberty, so therefore they're not an ally to the United States. Israel is persecuting Christians, right? These are things that are literally being pushed by Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens every single day. And you're seeing it start to affect young right-leaning Americans and how they view Israel, and how they view this idea that AIPAC should be branded a foreign agency in America, even though it's all Americans that run AIPAC. AIPAC literally is an American organization, but we're being told that's run by foreigners. That is literally a talking point that's spread by these podcasts. And yes, it is impacting how young people at least think and vote. And I think that will have impacts in America in future elections. Maybe not next election, but down the line.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really key point at the end. And even you'll watch, last interview that Fox News did with Bibi, Prime Minister Netanyahu, Tucker was referenced. It enters into mainstream and it boils over. Corey, how can people follow you? They can go to your podcast, of course. Yeah. Where else can people read and absorb your work?
Well, I write at the Allgemeiner, so I'll plug them. They're my employer. So the Allgemeiner
Smart move.
Yeah, they are a Jewish outlet, so it's owned by Jews, and we cover the Middle East. And I particularly cover the D.C. beat and everything in Washington, D.C. that pertains to the Middle East or Israel. And also just follow me on social media, Twitter, at Corewy Writing is like the handle, but my name is Corewy Walker. Just follow me and be entertained, I guess.
With truth.
Yes, with truth.
The real version of truth. Thank you so much, Corey. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this episode. We love having you. Thank you so much for tuning in. However you do that, podcast, the Salem Network or YouTube, social media as well. We put up all the clips. Share this with your friends. If you found it interesting, if you enjoyed it, if something made you laugh, if something made you cry, share it with your networks. Thank you so much. We really appreciate your support. There was one little bit of feedback I wanted to give you today. We usually do fan feedback, but this has been such a long episode. I'm going to keep it tight. Hot Nut Bar on X says, there's enough room between your eyes for an entire adult head to fit. Okay, the eye thing confuses me. And I have to give it a little bit of validity because they used to say that sometimes on the Footy Show. Like a couple of people would say about the space between my eyes. Like, is this a thing? Am I freakish in that way? I'm happy for honesty. And if that's the biggest issue I have in my life, then I'm okay with that. But like, is it really that bad? Like, isn't it better than having them like close together? Like, I wouldn't have thought it was such a big deal that it would be weaponized against me. But do you know what? Good. I'm a bright side kind of girl. If it means I can fit more things between my eyes and my head, then that is a wonderful thing. And when I figure out what that thing will be that I can now fit between my eyes, I'll let you know. Love you all. See you tomorrow, 6 a.m.